Alone, crying and tied to a tree, the child awaited the worst, until calloused hands broke the ropes and enveloped her in unexpected warmth. Subscribe to the channel and follow how an unlikely encounter can transform fear into courage and loneliness into destiny. The sky closed in dense clouds when the first screams cut through the silence of the backlands. Muffled by the wind that brought the smell of dry earth, they still reached Juvenal's ears. Always attentive, always vigilant, living among the stones of the Caatinga, on the outskirts of the village that had banished him 5 years ago, the old healer embraced silence as his only faithful companion. He carried on his curved shoulders the weight of an accusation he had never committed, and in his chest, a wound that wouldn't heal, being rejected by his people and feared by strangers. He no longer had a place in the world, until that waning moon night. The children's screams called to him as if they were directed especially at him, as if only he could hear that lament coming from the solitary cashew tree near the road. Juvenal followed the sound with slow, measured steps, like one who recognizes in another's suffering an echo of his own torment. The ancient tree stood solitary in the clearing, its shadows dancing under the weak light of stars that struggled to appear between the clouds. Tied to the gnarled trunk was a girl. She couldn't be more than 7 years old, with tangled black hair falling over her brown face. Delicate hands bound by rough ropes, eyes wide with terror, her frail body trembling like a leaf in the wind. Someone had drawn symbols on her skin with red iricum, symbols that didn't belong to that innocent child, marks that accused, that condemned. The little one, unable to understand the cruelty of adults, only sobbed, her tears tracing paths through the dust on her face. Juvenal knelt before her. His rough fingers, knowledgeable of plants and their secrets, touched the ropes with almost reverent delicacy. "Easy, little one. I haven't come to harm you," he whispered with his deep voice, so little used in recent years. When he loosened the knots that bound her, she collapsed against his chest, as if her legs could no longer support her. He wrapped her in the raw cotton shawl he wore on his shoulders, the same one that Donna Zephyr had woven for him before the accusations transformed him into an outcast. The path to his dwelling in the cave, hidden among the rocks, was long. Night advanced while he carried the girl who, exhausted, had fallen asleep in his arms. There was no hurry. Only care not to wake her, not to bring terror back to those childish eyes. In his humble abode he lit the fire with dry twigs. He prepared a broth of cassava and herbs, the only food he possessed. He cleaned the wounds on the child's wrists with Aroera infusion, warmed her feet, chilled by the cold night of the backlands, and sang softly an old song that his grandmother used to sing to chase away children's nightmares in the village. Verses in an almost forgotten language that spoke of protection and shelter. The girl finally relaxed in sleep, and only then did Juvenal allow the tears to come. He cried silently for the injustice of the world, for the imposed solitude, for the memory of the day he was expelled simply for protecting a young woman unjustly accused of witchcraft. Defender of curses, carrier of misfortune, they shouted against him, while dragging him out of the community. That night seemed like a distant echo, now repeated with another innocent. When the sun rose behind the distant mountains, the girl woke frightened, her eyes scanning the unknown environment with distrust. "Where is my mother?" she asked with a trembling voice. Juvenal offered her fresh water in a gourd. "I don't know, little one. I found you alone." She lowered her eyes, shrinking. "They said I brought the drought. That because of me the crops died." Her little fingers pointed to the symbols on her skin. They marked this so the rain would return. Juvenal felt his stomach contract with anger, but kept his voice calm. "What's your name?" "Yara," she replied so quietly it was barely audible. "It's a beautiful name." "Yara, name of the Lady of Waters." He attempted a smile, receiving only a distrustful look in response. "Do I have to take you back?" The question came out like a plea. Juvenal shook his head. "Not until it's safe, and until then you can stay here." He extended the gourd again. "Now drink. You need to recover your strength." In the days that followed, Yara spoke little but observed everything attentively. Juvenal's precise gestures when preparing medicines, the names he gave to plants when he collected them, the way he whistled softly before approaching birds so as not to startle them. She learned in reverent silence, and he, with simple gestures and measured words, showed her a world without the cruelty she had known. In the village of Pedraseca, the disappearance of the offering caused an uproar. The elders said the drought would last for years, that the crops would die definitively. Others, that the exiled old healer had stolen the girl to use her blood in forbidden rituals. The story grew, became distorted. Rumors spoke that the cursed girl and the herb man would bring disgrace to all. "We have 3 days until the full moon," pronounced Seu Norberto, the local leader, raising his fist to the sky. "If we don't find the girl by then, there will be no more hope for our lands." The men armed themselves with machetes and hoes, forming a search party. The few voices that dared to question, like that of old midwife Janaína, were quickly silenced by collective fear. Juvenal was collecting Jurema roots when he felt the wind change. Years living in communion with nature had taught him to read its warnings. There was strange movement in the surroundings. He hurried back to the cave, where Iara was playing with an improvised doll made of straw and scraps. Seeing him enter breathless, she immediately sensed the danger. She didn't need words. The coexistence of recent days had already created between them a silent language. "Do we need to hide?" she asked, already gathering the doll against her chest. Juvenal nodded. As a precaution only. But he knew it was more than that. The approaching group brought with it the hatred he knew well. He helped Iara hide in the back of the cave, where a narrow passage led to a smaller chamber, lit only by a crack in the rocky ceiling. "Stay here. Don't make noise no matter what you hear." She grabbed his rough hand. "You're coming back, aren't you?" There was so much fear in that question that Juvenal felt his heart tighten. "I'll return. I promise." It was a promise made with the gravity of a sacred oath. While preparing some herbs for emergencies, memories of the past returned with overwhelming force. 20 years dedicated to that village. 20 years healing wounds, treating fevers, bringing children into the world with his skillful hands, until the drought that began 6 years ago, killing cattle, drying sources, turning crops to dust. And then came the accusation against Mariana, the young woman who had come from outside to be a teacher. They said she brought bad luck in her luggage, that her knowledge challenged traditions. When they decided to expel her, or worse, Juvenal intervened. "There's no curse in her, only ignorance in you," he said before everyone. For that defense he was declared an accomplice. He would have been lynched if Donna Zephyr, the old midwife, hadn't reminded everyone how many lives he had saved. Still, he was expelled. "Take the teacher and never return," they ordered. And he did so. He accompanied Mariana to the big city, made sure she would be safe, and then returned, not to the village but to the Caatinga that had always been his true home. The sound of voices pulled him from his recollections. They were close now. He took his staff, the only item he could call a weapon, and positioned himself at the cave entrance. He wouldn't flee this time. "He must be around here." "I saw smoke coming from these parts last night," someone shouted. "The old man was always good at hiding." "Like a snake," replied another voice that Juvenal recognized as belonging to Tonho. "Seu Norberto's nephew. He took the offering. The drought will kill us all because of him." The steps approached, breaking dry branches, pushing aside the sparse vegetation. Juvenal breathed deeply, gripping the staff firmly. That's when he heard a voice he didn't expect. There's no proof it was him. It could have been some animal that took her. It was Janaína, the midwife who had replaced Donna Zephyr. "Shut up, old woman. Everyone knows you always defended that sorcerer. Respect your elders, Tonho. Wasn't I the one who brought you into this world with these hands?" The momentary silence that followed gave Juvenal the certainty that there was at least one reasonable person in the group. But it wouldn't be enough to contain the fury of the others. The first men appeared in the clearing before the cave. There were 5, armed with farming tools that now served as weapons. Behind them, Janaína, with her colorful shawl and worried countenance, and leading the group Seu Norberto carrying an old shotgun. "Show yourself, Juvenal. We know you're there with the girl." The leader shouted. There was no more hiding. Juvenal came out into daylight, the staff firmly planted on the ground before him. Not in attack position, but as support for his tired body. "What do you want from me this time?" he asked with a firm voice. "We've come to get what's ours," replied Norberto, raising the shotgun. "The girl doesn't belong to you. She's not an object to be possessed or sacrificed. You don't know what you're talking about. That child brought disgrace to our land. The only disgrace I see is the ignorance that transforms innocent children into scapegoats. Tonho advanced a step, threatening. Where is she, old man? Talk or we'll turn this rat's nest upside down. Juvenal didn't move. The girl is safe, and so she shall remain. You don't understand, insisted Norberto, his voice trembling with contained rage. We have only 2 days until the full moon. If the offering isn't completed, we'll lose everything. The entire village will die of hunger. And sacrificing a child would bring the rain back? What kind of god would accept such an offering? The tension grew. The men exchanged glances, nervous but determined. Janaína stepped forward. Juvenal, nobody wants to hurt the girl. We just want to take her back to her mother. It was a lie, and everyone knew it. Yara's own mother had consented to the ritual, terrorized by community pressure. Where is her mother now? Why didn't she come to get her daughter? Heavy silence. It was Janaína who answered in a low voice. Clede left. She couldn't bear the weight of what they did to her daughter. The words fell like stones. Juvenal felt a presence behind him, and knew even before turning that Yara had come out of hiding. She was there, small and fragile, her eyes fixed on the men who had condemned her. Mama left. The childish voice trembled with pain. No one dared answer. She did, Juvenal confirmed gently. But you're not alone. He placed his protective hand on the girl's shoulder. The men instinctively stepped back, as if the sight of the child still with Urukum marks on her skin was a bad omen. You can't take her, Juvenal affirmed with unshakable determination. Anyone who tries will have to get past me first. Don't be foolish. Hold man, mocked Tonho. It's 5 against 1. 6 against 1, corrected Norberto, including Janaína in the count. But the midwife stepped aside, distancing herself from the group. No, don't count on me for this. Everyone stared at her in surprise. What are you saying, woman? Questioned Norberto. I'm saying I've seen enough ignorance in this land. I've seen children die of hunger because their parents preferred to believe in superstitions rather than plant at the right time. Janaína approached Juvenal and Yara. I'm not young or strong, but I won't stand on the side of those who threaten children. The tension hung in the air like electricity before a storm. Norberto seemed about to explode with rage, seeing the midwife changing sides. You'll also be marked as a traitor, Janaína. The old lady raised her chin, unyielding. I've buried 3 husbands and brought 17 children into the world. Your threats don't scare me. Norberto. Her voice, though weak with age, carried the strength of one who had faced sufferings greater than any punishment they could impose. The impasse seemed to have no solution. The men, undecided between advancing or retreating, kept their weapons at hand. That's when the sky, previously clear, began to darken rapidly. Heavy clouds formed as if summoned by an invisible force. Everyone looked up, amazed by the sudden change. It's a sign! Shouted one of the men, dropping his hoe. The girl? She's really cursed. Panic began to spread through the group. Juvenal knew it was just a coincidence. Storm clouds had been forming for days. But he saw in that moment an opportunity. It's not a curse, he said with a grave and imposing voice. It's protection. The girl doesn't bring drought. She brings rain. The wide eyes of the men turned to him. You tied her up, hurt her, and still she can save you all. But only if it's by her own will. A distant thunder emphasized his words, as if nature itself conspired in his favor. Yara looked at Juvenal, confused. He knelt before her, speaking low so that only the girl and Janaína could hear. Trust me, little one. It's just a natural storm, but they need to believe you have power. It's our chance. The girl nodded slightly, understanding with wisdom beyond her age. Juvenal stood again. Yara will choose her own destiny. Neither I nor you will decide for her. Norberto gave a nervous laugh. You're delusional, old man. She's just a child. A child you believe is powerful enough to control the weather, retorted Janaína. If she has such power, then she has the right to choose. The argument temporarily silenced the village leader. Taking advantage of the hesitation, Juvenal addressed the girl with ceremonial respect. Yara, Lady of Waters, what do you wish to do? Do you want to return to the village, or remain under my protection? All eyes turned to the small figure. Yara breathed deeply, looked at the men who had condemned her and then at Juvenal who had saved her. I want to stay with the one who protected me, she said with surprising clarity. but I want the rain to fall for everyone. Another thunder, closer now. The first drops began to fall, thick and heavy. The men stepped back, looking at the sky with a mixture of fear and hope. "Look," exclaimed Janaína, pointing to the sky. The child spoke and the rain came. It was a convenient interpretation of natural events. But Juvenal realized it was exactly what they needed at that moment, a miracle that could be understood by simple and superstitious minds. "She chose," he affirmed with authority, "and her choice brought the blessing you so desired." The rain intensified rapidly. In a few minutes everyone was soaked, but no one moved. It was as if they witnessed a sacred event, something that transcended their limited understanding. Slowly Tonho lowered his scythe. Then, one by one, the other men lowered their improvised weapons. Only Norberto kept the shotgun raised, his face contorted in an expression of confusion and despair. "This doesn't change anything," he tried to argue, but his voice was almost swallowed by the sound of rain. "It changes everything," contradicted Janaína. "The drought is over, Norberto. Not because of sacrifices or rituals, but because the weather simply changed, as it always changes." One of the men stepped forward, facing his leader. "Let's go, Sr. Norberto. We already have what we came for." The rain returned. The old leader's resistance began to weaken before the evidence falling from the sky. He lowered his weapon slowly, defeated more by nature than by arguments. "This isn't over," he muttered before turning and beginning to walk back, followed by the other men. Only Janaína remained, her old body trembling slightly under the rain. Juvenal led her into the cave along with Yara. The three sat around the newly lit fire, drying themselves in contemplative silence. "They'll come back," the midwife finally said. "Norberto isn't a man to easily forget or forgive." Juvenal nodded. "I know, we have until tomorrow at most. And then we'll have to leave. I know places where we can live in peace far from here." He looked at Yara, who had huddled near the fire. "That is if you want to come with me, little one." "And my mother?" she asked, hope still alive in her eyes. Janaína and Juvenal exchanged glances. It was the midwife who answered. "Your mother went south, child. She said she was looking for work in the sugar mills. I can't say if she'll ever return." It was a half-truth. Clede had left, yes, but after so much shame and guilt, it was unlikely she would return. Yara absorbed the information with the surprising resilience that only children possess. "Then I'll go with you," she decided, looking at Juvenal. "Will you teach me about plants?" The old healer smiled for the first time in a long time. "I'll teach you everything I know." Janaína stood with difficulty. "I need to go back before they miss me." "I'll try to calm them down, buy more time for you." Juvenal held her wrinkled hands between his. "Thank you, Janaína. Your courage won't be forgotten." The old midwife smiled sadly. "It's not courage, Juvenal. It's just the weariness of seeing the same ignorance repeat itself, generation after generation." When she left, Juvenal began gathering his few belongings: dried herbs, healing instruments, seeds carefully kept in leather pouches. "Where are we going?" asked Yara, helping to organize the items. "West, beyond the mountains. There are communities there that respect ancient knowledge. We'll be welcome." The girl nodded, accepting her new destiny with touching maturity. While they worked, she watched every movement of Juvenal's, learning silently. "Why did they choose me?" she asked suddenly. "Why not another child?" Juvenal stopped what he was doing, considering how to answer. "Because you're different, Yara. You see beyond what they can see. That scares people." "How do you know?" "Because I'm like that too. And I recognize this gift when I see it." The girl reflected for a moment. "Is it a gift or a curse?" "It depends on how you use it. And on who's beside you to guide you." The rain continued to fall outside, transforming the dry earth into fertile mud. The two worked until late, preparing for the journey that would begin at dawn. When they finally lay down to rest, Juvenal told ancient stories about healers who traveled between peoples, carrying knowledge and healing. Yara fell asleep dreaming of these wise wanderers, imagining herself as one of them in the future. Dawn brought with it the mist that rose from the wet earth. The rain had stopped during the night, leaving the air clean and fresh. Juvenal woke before sunrise, as was his custom. He found Yara already awake, sitting at the cave entrance, observing the world reborn by water. "Did you sleep well?" he asked, sitting beside her. I dreamed of my mother, she replied simply. She said everything was okay now. Juvenal didn't comment. He knew that dreams often brought the comfort that reality denied. He was checking his provisions for the journey when he heard the sound, hurried footsteps, excited voices. Many voices. They came, he whispered to Yara, earlier than expected. The girl stood, alarmed. Are we going to run? No, Juvenal decided after a moment of reflection. Running now would only postpone the inevitable. We need to face them one last time. The group approaching was larger than the previous days. Almost the entire village seemed to have come. Men, women, even children watching from afar. Juvenal breathed deeply and went out to meet them, with Yara firmly holding his hand. Norberto led again, but something had changed. His countenance no longer showed the arrogance of before. Beside him was Janaina, her face marked by recent bruises. What did you do to her? Asked Juvenal, feeling anger grow at seeing the midwife's condition. The price of betrayal, replied Norberto coldly. And the same awaits you two. Juvenal placed Yara behind him, protecting her with his body. The rain came as you wanted. What more do you desire? Justice, shouted Tonho. The witch and her protector need to be punished. Murmurs of agreement ran through the crowd. Juvenal realized there were no arguments that could penetrate such a level of ignorance. He prepared for the worst. That's when Janaina, despite her weakened state, stepped forward. You speak of justice. Her voice trembled but was audible to all. What justice is there in punishing a child? What justice is there in attacking an old woman who only spoke the truth? Norberto tried to silence her with a brusque gesture, but she dodged. All of you were desperate for rain, and it came, not because of rituals or sacrifices, but because that's how nature works. Drought comes and goes like the seasons. Shut up, old woman, someone from the crowd shouted. I won't be silent, she replied with surprising vigor. I'm almost 70 years old. I've seen worse droughts than this. I've seen how people always look for someone to blame instead of joining forces to survive. Her words seemed to find some resonance, especially among the older members of the group. A middle-aged woman stood out from the crowd. And what do you suggest, Donna Janaina? That we just let these two simply go away after challenging our traditions? The midwife looked at Juvenal and Yara before answering. I suggest we remember who we really are. This man, she pointed to Juvenal, saved many of you. He cured fevers, treated wounds, helped bring your children into the world. And as thanks, we expelled him for defending an innocent. The same woman seemed to hesitate. But the teacher, she taught strange things to the children. She taught them to read and write, exclaimed Janaina. She taught that there's a world beyond Pedra Seca. Was that her crime? The silence that followed was heavy, loaded with poorly admitted shame. Norberto, realizing he was losing control of the situation, tried to regain it. We didn't come here to discuss the past. We came to take these two and ensure they never disturb our peace again. Your peace? Questioned Juvenal, finally speaking up. What peace exists in a place where children are tied to trees? Where knowledge is feared as if it were poison? He looked into the eyes of each person present before continuing. I will leave, yes. I'll take Yara with me to where she can grow without fear. But first I want each of you to look at her and say, if you really believe this child brought the drought. The crowd stirred, uncomfortable. Tiara, until then hidden behind Juvenal, stepped forward. The Urukum symbol still visible on her skin contrasted with the clear and innocent look she directed at the adults. I didn't want the plants to die, she said with her childish voice. I always liked flowers. The simplicity of that statement seemed to hit those present more than any elaborate argument. A younger woman began to cry silently. A man lowered his head, ashamed. It was in this moment of collective hesitation that a deafening thunder cut through the sky. Everyone looked up, amazed. The clouds that had dissipated were now returning with redoubled force. See? Shouted Norberto, pointing to the sky. It's her! She controls the storms! But his argument, which the day before would have found fertile ground, now sounded weak, desperate. The woman who had questioned Janaina approached Yara slowly. She crouched to be at the girl's height. You're Yara Clede's daughter, aren't you? The girl nodded, suspicious. My daughter Anina is your age. You used to play together before. She left the sentence incomplete, disturbed by her own participation in the events. If you... If you could make the rain stop just a little so we can talk, would you do that? Juvenal almost intervened to explain that the girl didn't have such power, but something in Yara's look stopped him. The child raised her face to the sky and closed her eyes. Everyone watched in silence. To everyone's amazement, including Juvenal's, the rain that was beginning to fall gradually diminished until it became just a light drizzle. "How?" murmured Juvenal, genuinely surprised. Yara smiled at him. "I felt it was going to diminish, like you taught me to feel when plants are ready to be harvested." It was coincidence, of course. It had to be. But in that moment, even Juvenal doubted his own certainties. The woman talking to Yara stood up, turning to the crowd. "You saw? She doesn't wish us harm. She never did." She looked directly at Norberto. "It was us who did harm to her." One by one, the villagers began to step back, as if shame finally materialized in their hearts. Some murmured apologies. Others simply lowered their heads, unable to face what they had done. Only Norberto and Tonho remained firm in their hostility. "This isn't over," threatened the old leader. "You'll still pay for what you've done." But his words sounded empty now, devoid of the power they once carried. The community had changed in those few minutes. Or perhaps, as Juvenal thought, it had simply awakened from a collective nightmare. "Go away," Janaina finally said. "Leave them in peace." The authority in her voice surprised everyone. Slowly, reluctantly, Norberto and Tonho withdrew, following the rest of the group that was already descending the trail back to the village. Only the woman who had spoken to Yara remained. "My name is Teresa," she introduced herself. If you want to stay, I can offer shelter in my house. It's not big, but we all fit." Juvenal remained silent, pondering the unexpected offer. It was Yara who answered. "Can we stay, Juvenal? At least until the next moon?" The old healer looked at the girl, then at Janaina and Teresa. Something had changed, not just in the village, but within him as well. "We can try," he finally agreed. 15 years later. 15 years passed since that day. The drought gave way to regular seasons of rain. The village of Pedra Seca grew, transforming into a small town with a school, health post, and even a community library. Juvenal never lived in a cave again. Teresa's house expanded to accommodate him and Yara, gradually becoming a center of healing and learning. The girl grew strong and wise, combining Juvenal's traditional knowledge with the books she devoured in the library. She became known as the Water Girl, not because she controlled rains, though some still believed this, but because she developed irrigation techniques that saved many crops during dry periods. Norberto and Tonho eventually left the village, unable to accept the changes. Janaina lived until 90, respected by all as the voice of wisdom. On her deathbed, she held Juvenal's and Yara's hands. "You two," she whispered with her last breath, "are proof that even the worst winds bring good seeds." Today, when visitors arrive in the town, they are greeted by a statue in the center of the square, a girl and an old man holding hands looking toward the horizon. At the foot of the sculpture, a simple plaque, "To Yara and Juvenal, who taught us to see beyond fear." And whoever passes by the community clinic on Tuesday and Thursday afternoons will find Yara, now a 22-year-old woman, teaching children the secrets of healing plants. Beside her, Juvenal, with completely white hair, watches with pride his apprentice who became a master. Do you remember that day when the rain diminished? Sometimes a curious young person asks. Yara smiles, exchanging a knowing look with her mentor. "Nature has its own mysteries," she responds. "Our task isn't to control it, but to learn to dance with it." And so what began with a child tied to a tree transformed into a community where knowledge is valued and difference celebrated. Where once there was fear, now understanding flourishes. Where exclusion existed, belonging grew. If this story touched your heart, don't forget to subscribe to the channel for more narratives that remind us of the power of empathy and wisdom.